So again, thank you very much indeed, Emily, for having accepted the invitation, for the time and generosity. I
It's a
have
pleasure
a
to be here. Hi.
yeah. So I have a very introductory note about you and your research, and then we start with the questions. You can correct if there is something missing. So Emily Thomas is a professor at Durham University. She's a historian of philosophy focusing on 17th to early 20th century metaphysics. Much of her work concerns time and space, but she's also interested in substance, change, idealism, process, emergentism, personal identity, and philosophical questions about travel. So among her books are Absolute Time, Rifts in Early Modern British Metaphysics, The Meaning of Life, which actually brought me to you and this interview, and the new book, I suppose, is Victoria Welby. You've also written extensively articles on different issues, as I said. So is it still valid? I mean, is
It
any
is.
new? All right.
Nope, all still good.
All right, okay. So, so well, I came across your book in Iran in a bookshelf, and I really found it immediately interesting, and bought and started the reading, enjoying the book, and then I found also the English translation. So it's also similar, even the cover. So it's a Persian translation. It's the English book, and so my first question, Emily, is what brought you to this topic? Why did you write about traveling?
The very short answer is I am really obsessed with travel. So I am a professional philosopher, but I have spent several years of my life backpacking, and I reached a point in my career where I could do something fun if I wanted to, and I decided to see if there would be anything in the relationship between philosophy and travel. And when I started out, I thought, oh, I'll just spend a couple of weeks on this. Probably there won't be anything in it. And then I found that there was lots in it, that in fact there's this really rich history between the two. And I really just dove into it. It was brilliant to discover there was so much material. Philosophers have thought so much about travel, and it turns out that travel has had this huge impact on philosophy, and it was a really great thing to research.
Right, as you say, actually, it's a very underexploited topic in philosophy. But my question here, what I've written here, is that which I sort of sympathize with that, even from Persian literature point of view, is the relation between traveling and change. And a lot of people think of traveling as a kind of motivation for self-transformation, for the new relation to themselves. What do you think of it? I mean, you have been traveling a lot, and you see also the transformation probably in yourself.
I think that's true. So, oddly enough, a lot of literature around travel and your identity as a person is not so much about change. It's rather about discovering yourself. That if you travel, that somehow you'll become acquainted with your true core self. And that I think is just wrong. I think you're absolutely right. That what happens when you travel is that you change. And I think very often that changes for the better. Um, yeah. And I think that is simply because anytime you push yourself to do something that's difficult or unfamiliar or challenging, and what counts as different and unfamiliar and challenging is going to be different for every person. But whenever you push yourself to do something like that, that can involve a change for the better. And I think that travel, it can involve all of those things.
Yeah, wonderful. I mean, my next question is sort of perhaps two questions embedded in one. So, because I mean, there is a fact about traveling. There are those who can travel and those who simply can't. They can travel and they can gather experience and take their lessons, but there are people who can't really travel. There is not such a thing. Um, I'm reluctant to put it in one question, but I read the whole question. If you want, you can break it down into two answers. Or yeah, there is not such a thing in philosophy as a philosophy of travel, let's say department in universities. And you claim that philosophy and travel have enjoyed a kind of love affair. What's the use of having a philosophy specified in traveling, and what can it contribute to thought, and more important, to life itself? I mean,
Okay.
it's a very large question, I know. Yeah, so it's
No,
like
that's
two or
okay.
three different topics. Yeah, so
Um, shall I talk about the issue with people who can and can't travel first? And
absolutely, I would be
then
grateful.
okay. So you are absolutely right. For all kinds of reasons around the world, some people can travel easily and others can't. And throughout history, that has also been the case. I mean, in fact, historically, only a teeny tiny proportion of people in each society could travel. The vast majority couldn't. That's why some people say at the age of mass tourism is a golden age, because so many increasing numbers of people can travel. I think if you can't travel, I think that's really sad. I think it's an opportunity that should be available to everybody. That said, I don't think that the benefits of travel can be obtained exclusively through travel. I do think that anything that pushes you when you find challenging and unfamiliar, it can give you the same benefits. I just think travel is one particular route to that. And throughout history, there have been many philosophers, as well as other thinkers, who've actually argued that if the goal of travel is to learn about the world, you're better off not traveling. You're actually better off sitting at home, studying books and maps. And in that way, your knowledge of places will actually be much richer and deeper, merely than by wandering around a city with no idea where you're going or what you're seeing. So the goods of travel are not necessarily obtained only by travel. Turning to your question about the point of the philosophy of travel, again, I think anything that helps us to think more deeply about the human experience is a good thing. Anything that is going to give you new angles, again, unfamiliar ways of thinking, is going to be really positive. And it might well be, it almost certainly will be, that you will come across ideas that philosophers have had about travel that you think are just wrong. But great. I think the process of entertaining ideas, whether you reject them or agree with them, is a really useful thing to do. When it comes to the philosophy of travel in particular, what I've really focused on is the way that, to my surprise, I have found travel has affected the history of Western philosophy, and that Western philosophy has affected travel practices. So I can give you some examples if that would be helpful. So when it comes to travel affecting philosophy, I think a wonderful example is John Locke. He's a British 17th century philosopher, and he is thinking very hard about what the origins of our ideas are. And back in the 17th century, most people thought that a good number of our key ideas are innate. So you're just born with them. This is an idea that goes back to Plato and other Greek scholars. Locke thinks that's just not true at all. In fact, our key ideas are something that we learn from experience. And he begins drawing on the travel literature of his day, which was becoming increasingly mammoth, thanks to the so-called age of discovery, where Europeans are sending their ships off all over the world. And he's drawing on the books about travel and the leaflets and the and even travelers themselves who are coming back, and they are showing that in other societies, people have radically different ideas about ethics and philosophy and religion. And Locke uses all of this to show, well, clearly not all human beings all across the world are born with the same key ideas. This must mean that our ideas aren't innate. So that's, I think, a good example of how travel affected philosophy. And as for going in the other direction, there are some really quite surprising cases. So, for example, Henry Moore, another 17th century philosopher, he came up with some new ideas about space. He thought that space is literally God's presence in the world. And this was just a new idea. People just hadn't thought about space that way before. He had a huge impact on Isaac Newton, who went on to argue something similar. And this, in turn, was taken up by artists and poets and painters who suddenly began extolling the virtues of space and big, infinite seeming spaces, so mountains and oceans. And then you begin to see this big cultural shift in the way that people thought about those things. So with mountains, in the early 17th century, they were described as boils, warts upon the surface of the earth. And then suddenly they become these almost divine cathedrals to God. And as a result, people begin going to visit them because tourists wanted to see these glorious mountains that they're now reading about in all these books. So these are the kinds of interactions that you get between philosophy and travel throughout history.
And yet we don't have any department like offering a course like philosophy of travel, right?
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think that we should, but it doesn't exist yet. And I think that's almost in. I suspect that is partly because the relationship between travel and philosophy is almost invisible. The cultural exchange of ideas between the two disciplines has been so big, it's almost hard to see them. Unlike debates that take the relationship between psychology and philosophy, where things became really tiny and detailed, and you had this explosion of literature in the 19th century. The philosophy travel relationship is almost taking place over a grander timescale.
Right. So Emily, my next question is somehow a follow-up to your previous answer about knowledge, which is a very interesting point. I would say that pushing our knowledge is one of the main effects of traveling. So can I go further and claim that, perhaps I'm not going further, it's just exactly what you said. Can I claim that traveling should result in taking ourselves, our values, our viewpoints in the end less seriously? I mean, can we have a kind of ideal form of travel? And we say that in that ideal scenario, traveling should suggest, should imply, or should cause some revision of the values, or at least some taking the values less seriously attitude, let's say.
Yeah, I think that I think that good travel does do that. It doesn't necessarily make you take them less seriously, but I would hope that it would force you to think about which of your beliefs or values that might seem absolute, set in stone, are actually just the product of the place where you grew up, or the society that you happen to be living in right now. And then the process of travel can help you to identify assumptions as assumptions, and then you can question them. And it might be that you think, oh no, that I still believe that belief, even though I know that it is probably the product of the society I grew up in. I still want to hold on to it. Or it might make you think, no, there's no reason for me to hold on to that at all. And now that I have identified it as an assumption, I actually think that it's a false one. And
Right.
I mean, I think that like reading good books and so on can also produce this effect on you.
Definitely. Definitely, definitely. Thank you. A bit of a longer question, Emily, is that although you sort of um, elaborated on that topic, but John Locke is an example of a philosopher who is curious to know if people all around the world think the same, as you said. And by reading plenty of travel books, he comes to the opposite conclusion, namely that people really think differently in different parts of the world. For example, by finding out that atheism, although it was exaggerated, as you say, runs rampant in Asia. Um, Anyhow, it enables Locke to mount an attack against the idea of innateness, which he started with. Um, Perhaps I'm repeating that question, but I would be thankful if you could just a bit more elaborate on the question, how has travel affected philosophy? I mean, you talked about it, but it's a very interesting topic for me because for most people, um, the interaction is actually limited to travel and literature, travel and biography, travel and autobiography, not philosophy. That's why I wanted to know more about it.
That makes sense. Um, okay. I think that travel first began having a big impact on philosophy in the late 16th century. When this age of discovery began happening. So late 15th, early 16th century is when European countries, prominently the Portuguese, the French, the British, began sending out ships all over the world. And we can say that they were after new knowledge. I think principally they were probably after money, like new trade routes and so on. But certainly a side effect of all of this travel, it was new knowledge. And people back home began getting really excited about it. You had this explosion within British society, for example, of people selling books about travel, selling maps, sea charts, even. People were really fascinated by like what was out there. And philosophers are part of society too, and they got really excited about this also. Francis Bacon, around this time, so he's late 16th, early 17th century, he was developing a new philosophy of science. So up until Bacon, a very common way of conceiving science was to say, if you want to know about a plant or an animal, you can sit in your armchair, think about it really hard, and you will come up with the answers as to what its nature is. And Bacon thought, I'm not sure about this. So Bacon developed a new philosophy of science that involved experimentation and observation. And that, I think, that was surely influenced by the fact he's seeing, these sailors and merchants coming back with new kinds of animals, new kinds of plants, new kinds of produce, and he's thinking, well, this is the way to advance science, to go out into the world and see what's there. And so Bacon makes travel the cornerstone of his philosophy of science. It's not just about experimentation, it's about going out into the world and gathering data. So under his new vision of science, science becomes data gathering. And this experience observation approach to philosophy and science has a massive impact on the people that came later. We suddenly have this run of British empiricists, so Thomas Hobbes, John Locke, who are all about experience, and they are also very interested in travel. And I don't think that's a coincidence. It is about learning about the world. We have, if we sort of skip forward a couple of 100 years, we move forward to the case of Henry Thoreau. So American philosopher, he starts off as a transcendentalist, similar to Emerson, and he starts off seemingly thinking about the natural world as a kind of reflection of God. It's yeah, it's kind of made in God's image. If we look at nature, we might be able to see God's reflection in it. But unlike Emerson, he spends a ton of time in nature. So famously, he goes out, builds himself a cabin by Walden Pond, and this experience of living in the woods, it shows him that nature isn't a reflection of God. Nature is a thing in itself. And if anything, it is God in its own right. And so this is another example where like travel, it has affected someone's philosophy. Now, of course, famously, Walden was a bestseller, smash hit. And so Walden, in turn, had an impact on future travel practices. People began getting really excited about wilderness travel. They wanted to imitate Thoreau and live in the woods and climb mountains. And that's still going on today.
Right.
If you look at travel books over the last 10 years, there will be at least half a dozen that cite Thoreau's Walden as an inspiration.
Great, thank you. I was thinking the other day that, I mean, as you just said, traveling has affected people's knowledge. Traveling has affected philosophy. Traveling has affected um, um, even perhaps ethics pillars sometimes. But recently I was thinking that I sort of have the impression that even traveling can affect people even aesthetically. You know, like let's say I have um I have your example. I'm not sure if I pronounce her first name correctly. Marjorie Hope Nicholson.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
right.
Majorie, I think.
Nature, right. In her book Mountain Gloom and Mountain Glory, claims that before the 17th century, people conceived mountains to be really ugly places. And then suddenly in the 18th century, people conceived mountains to be beautiful, charming, and mesmerizing, which is an example that convinces me that even the concept of beauty can change through traveling. The concept of like even
Mm.
aesthetically, not only epistemologically. Yeah. What do you think of it, especially because you talk about that book?
I think that is exactly right. I really do. So I think uh, what society deems to be beautiful, it changes over time and from one society to the next. And that travel can have a huge impact on what we do and don't deem beautiful. And something that Hope Nicholson notes in her book is that once tourism to mountains increased, people began realizing they are really beautiful. And then we have this whole aesthetic of alpine beauty come into existence. It didn't really exist before. And I think that is, yeah, I think that is absolutely a feature of travel. That how whether or not something is beautiful in our imagination can be utterly different to the reality of whether or not we find something beautiful.
Right, great, thank you. So I just mentioned it earlier that some people are forced to travel, although it's a realization that people make afterwards. Namely, some people after a while notice that, okay, they have traveled, but it was forcible. I mean, it was not their choice. It wasn't free travel. They had to travel because of their job, because of economic reasons, for political reasons, so on and so forth. Although it might result in a similar and positive change in that person, yet it is not as free as it sounds. What do you think of those people?
I I agree with you. I think people who are forced to travel are not free in that regard. In the book, I focus on the phenomenon of leisure travel pretty exclusively. So the idea of people who are voluntarily choosing to spend their leisure time traveling, as opposed to people who are forced to travel, as you say, through work, but also perhaps that they're refugees. In those, I think in those cases, if travel has beneficial side effects for them, that's wonderful, but it would still be much better if they were not forced to travel, if they don't want to. Yeah, I think forcing human beings to do anything is not good.
Right, right. A bit of jump to another question is that, of course, it's like a bit of um, ambitious, if not pushy question too, because you, as you just admitted, your book is about leisure travel. But my question is like, is colonization um, in that regard, like Europeans going there to discover, to improve their knowledge, and also, as you said, to make money? Is colonization simply seen as a sort of travel which has resulted in knowledge, in knowing new places, and pushing the limits of the colonizers' knowledge of the colonies? Or how do you define it? How do you see the way that colonizers traveled and travel?
Um,
It's a very large question.
yeah,
You have to excuse me.
that's all right. It's fine. It is a big question. Okay, so I don't think that colonizers are. I mean, it doesn't seem like they're giving up their leisure time to travel. It seems like this is what they are doing as an occupation in order to capture land, people, goods. I Lots of the travel that went on during the Age of Discovery was touted as being travel for knowledge. There is a long history of historians saying that that's just not really what it was. People were traveling to capture land and slaves and to make money out of it. That was really the principal reasons why they were traveling. And I think, yes, Europeans certainly did expand their knowledge of the world in that time. We Europeans filled in many more maps, for example, and we learned lots about new animals and plants. But I don't think that was the primary aim of people who were colonizing. I just don't. I mean, if that was their primary aim, then why would you bother capturing territory? And
Exactly.
yeah,
Right, right. So it doesn't count really as a simple traveling phenomenon.
So the very question of how to define travel is difficult. On a very basic level, traveling is just movement through space over time. And so in that case, by that characterization, absolutely, colonizers are traveling. The kind of travel that I was trying to capture in the book is the kind of travel that we read about in travel books that inspire us. So when I pick up I'm trying to think of a single travel book that I've read. I've read hundreds. But when I pick up a travel book that I really like, Terra Incognita, let's say, what is it about that kind of traveling that I find inspiring and uplifting? And it seems like when you read about it, or if you were to undertake a trip like that for yourself, that would improve your life. And that kind of traveling, I've characterized as deliberately setting out to encounter the unfamiliar. That when you're doing that, then you're really trying to learn things about the world that you didn't know before. And yes, I think colonizers ended up doing that as a side effect, but I'm doubtful that was their principal aim.
Mm. Emily, another question of mine might be, again, not that relevant to your research, but it's like a personal, ambitious question, and a big question perhaps. How is it about those who live in between? Like, I mean, there is a kind of permanent traveling to between two cultures, to constantly traveling from country A to country B, culture B. Do you also call it travel in your definition, the basic definition? Because it's also constant exposure to unfamiliarity in that sense, does it also count as a kind of um, uh, yeah, travel with advantages that you had in mind?
Are you thinking of people who are traveling all the time, like travel bloggers, say, who are constantly on the move, or are you thinking of something
Not
else?
exactly. It was a bit of egoistic question. It was like about people like me, like having family in Iran, but living here like a decade or so,
Okay.
and they're constantly going and coming back. So like this state of life is somehow transient, so it's not as
Yeah.
stable, it's not as stable as my brother, or it's not as stable as my friend who is German or he's European. So does it also count as a kind of traveling, or is it no? It's like a lifestyle that you have to,
Ah,
yeah.
well, it certainly counts as traveling in the sense you're moving through space over time a lot. And
Mm,
whether it counts as traveling in this sense of encountering the unfamiliar, I think will depend on how unfamiliar these places feel
mhm,
to you now. I can
mm,
imagine if you're traveling between them all the time, that maybe they both feel like home, or yeah, or at least that you know both of them very well.
mm, mm.
Yeah, so I think that's how I would answer that
Right,
question.
right. So the familiarity is actually the ultimate criterion in that regard. If the
Yeah, I think so.
You're right. Yeah, yeah, I agree with you. Though it's interesting that always there is a place that is more familiar,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
like that sense of belonging arises from that. And
yeah.
yeah, right.
I really see
So
that. Yeah.
yeah,
I will also say, in the case of the perpetual traveler, take the travel blogger or the Instagrammer who is
mm, mm,
constantly traveling the world. I I think it is possible to become cocooned within the
mm,
mechanisms of travel. So you
mm,
become very used to the same kind of hotel room day after day. You're always traveling in trains that feel similar or planes that feel similar. And you have to force yourself to leave the mechanisms of travel and get out into the world to
mm.
encounter that kind of otherness again.
Right, right. I see. Interesting point. And which is somehow related to my next question. There is a phenomenon that actually I came across in Germany more than other places I've visited in Europe, which is like these kind of planned holidays. The question of globalization and the possibility of meeting the unfamiliar has been dramatically increasing. But actually, most of the time, I have this impression not everyone is interested in being in touch with the unfamiliar at the same time. Like but it's booked. We know where we are going. We know the hotel. Everything is safe and secure. And so, in that experience, a holiday booked is an experience which brings you to the ease and comfort of the familiarity. And I think, according to your criterion, it doesn't really count as a travel because you have diminished the possibility of exposure to unfamiliarity.
I agree. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and certainly, I wouldn't be very interested in reading a travel book about someone's package holiday. Well, I would be very
Mm,
interested in reading travel books about people's
right.
journeys
Right.
to less familiar places.
I mean, is that like
Yeah,
the same phenomena in the UK? Like you also experience it? Um,
definitely. Yeah, for
mm,
sure. And I think, um, I think in the basic sense, traveling through space over time, people travel for all kinds of reasons. And I think when many people go on holiday, they want to relax and eat nice food
exactly.
and enjoy the weather. And that's wonderful. But that's not the same, I think, as engaging in the kind of travel that that we find inspirational or mind
Right.
expanding. I mean, it's possible to do a bit of that too, right? You
Right.
might book yourself on a package tour, but then spend 2 days going on a hike somewhere that you've never been before,
Mhm.
and you really experience a significant amount of otherness on those 2 days.
Right.
But that's not the same as someone going off on a month-long climb up a mountain that they're
Mhm.
completely unfamiliar with.
Right. Interesting. Thank you for the point here. And the last question um, has a bit of relation between aging and travel. Can it be that um, people are interested in getting um, to know or being exposed to the unknown when they can actually afford it? I mean, when they're young, when they're able to analyze it, when they're able to integrate that in their lifestyle, when you're able to make use of it. And the older you are, the less interested you might be in in experiencing the unfamiliar. I mean, it's like a very loud thinking question, actually. It's not a question, it's like a, yeah, impression, perhaps, at best.
That's okay. I don't know. It's the short answer. I'm not aware of any work that's been done on the relationship between aging and then the kind of travel that one seeks out. I am sure in the history of travel there will be many examples of older travelers who've gone out and done like astonishing difficult things.
Right.
And it anecdotally, for what it's worth, I can say that when I was younger, I was really happy to like sleep on buses overnight. Thought absolutely nothing of 40-hour bus journeys. And now I'm older, I am past that. So it might well be. It, um, I certainly want to see as much of the world as I can, but maybe my tolerance for lack of creature comforts has decreased now I'm older, and maybe that is a common experience that many
Right.
people have, but I'm
Right.
not sure. That would be
No, wonderful. Yeah.
anecdotal.
Yeah, is are you writing any book now that is like you want to talk about?
I am writing another book now, but it's not a trade book.
Okay.
Uh, another book on the philosophy of time. Yeah, but it is intended for other academics. I will definitely write another fun book after this one, but I'm not there yet.
And are you teaching like travel, philosophy of travel also in
I'm
into
not actually. I'm actually on research leave right now.
oh, you're under
Yeah,
research,
so I'm
but
teaching very little.
all right, all right.
But
But
yes,
have you
I
also
haven't
taught
taught.
courses on travel?
I haven't. I've incorporated it into lecture courses on other things.
Right,
So, for example, I teach some of the material on travel when I talk about John Locke on innate
all right,
ideas.
all
But
right.
haven't gone any further than that. I would love to, but my university has a very sensible policy that if you're going to introduce a course, there should be more than one person that can teach it in case
All
something
right.
goes wrong.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Okay.
I'd have to persuade someone else to do it with
And
me.
the very last question, I promise, is that is there any place that you're planning to travel to?
Ah, it, yeah. I think next on my radar is Ethiopia.
Wow.
I lived for 3 months last year in Malawi, and when I was there, obviously learning all kinds of things, but I began to get very interested in Ethiopia uh, because it's one of the few African countries that has an awful lot of ruins left. And so yeah, I
Fantastic.
think that will be next up.
Yeah, I also would like to go to Ethiopia. I had some classmates once I was doing my PhD, and I found it also very inspirational and interesting. Emily, thank you very much indeed.